we're afraid of what people will think, or we're afraid we're not good enough, or we're afraid we're too much. And so we hold ourselves back. When we do that, we're muting ourselves. And there are too many people that are muting themselves in the world. And I, for so many years, was one of them. I've discovered the power of unmuting myself, of showing up in the world in a way that is joyfully expressed and boldly alive. That's something that has been so important to me as I've discovered how freeing it is to be unmuted, to unmute our body and to unmute our ideas and to unmute our desires, to unmute ourselves in relationships and at work, and to be our own advocates and to ask for what we want and need. The unmuted life is a life that is fully alive and fully expressed and confident and clear. And to me, it's the only way that I know how to live now. I know what it's like to feel confined and stuck and small and silenced. And I also know what it feels like to be expressed and alive and joyful and present and seen. And it's so much better of a life to be unmuted. And that is what I want to bring you into. Are you ready to unmute yourself? Let's make it happen. Hi there, everybody, and welcome to Unmute Yourself. It's another Unmuted Monday. I'm so glad that you all are joining us today. I'm really excited for this conversation, and let us know in the comments where you are joining us from. I always love to see who's here, to welcome you, to greet you by name. Deb Hallberg, I'm so glad that you are here. Toby, it's always wonderful to see you. I know we've got some other folks in the room that are joining us and that are going to be popping in today. Some people said, is this going to be recorded because I can't make the show? These shows are always available on YouTube and on this exact link after the show airs. So if you're ever looking to access a previous episode of the show, you can go to my YouTube channel. All the previous episodes are there, and all the episodes will be available on the exact link that the show invitation was listed on. So just a heads up in case you're ever curious, they do not go away. We can always get them to you. So again, good to have you here. We've got from Hawaii. Ooh, I love this. Is this Ai Tanaka joining us all the way from Hawaii? I'm here on the East Coast in Baltimore, Toby nearby in Hunt Valley. I'm beyond this. The topic of the show today is so near and dear to my heart. Angela from Seattle. Welcome. I know that this is going to be a conversation, I believe, that has the potential to significantly shift your perspective on how you view yourself, on how you view your past, on how you view what's possible, on your perspective on healing. I mean, I'm really, really excited about what is going to happen in just a moment. Before we introduce our guest, I want to share a couple of announcements. And before I share the announcements, would love for each of you to drop in the comments what is something that has been a bright spot in the past week for you. So something that gave you hope, that made you feel grateful, that reminded you of something you value. Drop in the chat. Let us know. It's really fun to celebrate these things together. I think so often we go through our days and we don't get a moment to pause and to reflect and to think about, all right, what's something good in a world where there's a lot of things that can be hard? It's important for us to pause and to connect with what is good. I had a very social weekend, so I would say that spending time with friends and spending time with my sister and her kids, those were some bright spots for me. A couple of announcements that I wanted to mention. If you haven't already seen it, my first music video, Light Bulbs, is out on YouTube now. I appreciate all of the love that you've shared for that music video. It was really fun to do, and more to come on that. Also, my new website is launching this week. It'll be racheldruckenmiller.com, and you'll see all new stuff on there. I'm really excited about it. It's been 3 months in the making. You may have noticed some new photography I've dropped to on LinkedIn. So I'm seeing here, oh, Tom, good to have you here. from California. Got my 100-hour bronze star for volunteering at the zoo. Tom is a docent and knows all things about animals. So if you ever need support on that, he can help you out. And then Deb, brunch with my tribe. Angela, seeing kids in the neighborhood selling baked goods. So industrious, right? I remember those days doing stuff like that. Julie, good to have you here enjoying the nature and beauty in the mountains at a ski resort. Oh, that sounds beautiful. I love, isn't it fun to just hear these special things that other people are experiencing? It's really nice. So with that, without further ado, I want to introduce you all to our guest today. I actually found out about her from a YouTube channel that I follow a lot. And the channel is called Therapy in a Nutshell with Aimee Apigian. And I found out about this person. I listened to their episode and I was like, I need to see if she'll be on my show. So Dr. Aimee Apigian is the founder of Trauma Healing Accelerated and is an expert on the biology of trauma. Beyond being a double board certified physician, Dr. Aimee is a leader and a speaker who hosts annual Biology of Trauma summits and leads online courses and trainings for practitioners in the biology of trauma lens. So without further ado, please help me give a warm, unmuted welcome to Dr. Aimee Apigian. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rachel. It's very good to be here.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to have you. And I'm curious, how would you answer that question? What was like a bright spot for you in the past few days, past week?
I call those glimmers. And a glimmer for me has been, we had a great weekend of weather. And so I went out and I had a very nice walk where I didn't do anything else. I didn't read. I didn't work. I just went for a walk and looked at the nature. That was a bright spot for me.
That's awesome. It's like you notice things, you hear a bird chirp or you hear a leaf crunch or just like things that when you're always glued to like a podcast or a phone call on a walk, you miss.
You miss. There's so much that we miss.
Yeah. I love that. And it's a pretty, I mean, it's a little chilly here, but it's a pretty day at least to look at. So yeah, there's nothing that a good weekend of weather can't do to like boost your mood, right? It's a special thing. So to get started, this show, we always talk about sharing stories of people unmuting themselves. And so I would love to hear a story about a time where you silenced yourself, where you felt muted in some aspect of your being, and to share the journey that you went on to unmute that part of yourself.
Rachel, as you ask that, I think of many times along my path that I muted myself. And that was a pattern that I had. So even a pattern coming out of my childhood was to be afraid to speak. And so that has been a pattern that I've gotten to work with in different areas of my life. One example that really had to shift things for me was when I adopted my son, Miguel. He came to me from the foster care system. I adopted him right after I finished my master's in biochemistry and was going back into third year of medical school, and became a foster parent, and they placed Miguel with me. And when I saw what would be his trajectory in the foster care system if I did not keep him and adopt him, then that was my decision for I'm going all in with Miguel. And the challenges that we had led me to a very confusing place. I felt very lost. I didn't know what was wrong. I didn't know where to get help. But because of my situation of being in medical school, and also at that time being part of a conservative religious group, there was a lot of stigma around even having a foster child, adopting as a single parent, and what was I even thinking? And so to even be able to ask for help or talk to people about, hey, like, this is what's happening in my home. I know you guys don't see this because he has very different behavior in front of everybody else, but this is what's happening behind the scenes. And I don't know what to do, and I'm very lost. And it was a place where then I needed to really do some deep soul searching for, am I going to mute myself, or am I going to speak up in order to get the help that I need from my whoever I can get help from.
Well, I want to continue this. We lost your video feed for some reason. Do you want to Um, sometimes this happens. There we are. Maybe we can bring you back up. Boom. There we go. I heard everything you shared. We just lost your video for like 10 seconds. And so then what steps did you take? You made the decision to say, all right, I'm going to not travel this path alone in terms of figuring out what to do.
Yeah, to get to the place where I was willing to be open about what was happening in my home
Mm.
was a very hard, but probably the most important decision that I made that shifted things for me.
Mm.
That decision to not keep it quiet, to not also pretend that everything was fine, but to be open about it and say, no, everything is not fine. I'm not doing well. I'm really struggling. I haven't been able to find anything that helps, and I need help. And it didn't necessarily, turn magical and that everybody came to help me at all. But what it shifted in me was that willingness to be open and not hide, um, allowed me to start to see solutions, to see options, to see other things that I hadn't tried yet. And let me try that. It started to open doors that I hadn't seen before, just in my own internal shift of deciding that no, like I'm in this, and this is what that means. I'm going to be speaking my voice. I'm going to be sharing the truth, not hiding that or muting myself.
Mm. I find that sometimes when I've done that, it's felt like liberating. It's like scary. It's like slightly terrifying and slightly liberating. Did you have a similar experience?
Absolutely. That's exactly what it was. Like both terrifying and so freeing.
Yeah.
And I remember, Rachel, it would shock people when, they would ask, like, oh, how are things going? And I would just kindly just tell them the truth, like, well, this is what's happened in our home today. And the behaviors were really severe. And so it would shock people when I started to just be open about it and not blaming anybody, not shaming anybody. It was just, I'm being real and open now.
Yeah. And people are just not used to that. I
People are
mean,
not used to the raw truth, right? Like it's part of our culture to just put a smile on your face, to to push through, to focus on the positive. And so people are not always prepared. But I also find that when they see it modeled, then it allows them that permission to start to see, where do I need some honest, raw truth in my life that could serve me.
yeah, it's true. I mean, Toby said, like, sounds like you embrace living truthfully, like the truth will set you free. Like, it really is that feeling of once you stop hiding, like all the fears that we think are going to happen if we come out of hiding and somebody knows that we're a human who struggles with things. We make up some story about what's going to happen when they see that side of us, as opposed to just the side of us that's like so impressive and put together.
Yes, and it will start to shift your relationships. At least that's what happened to me. There were people that could never get comfortable with that, and they didn't want to be around that. And so it really helped clarify who were the quality people in my life and who was just there and just needing the pretty picture.
It's kind of like a biochem class in school, right? Where people are like, this is the thing that weeds out the people that aren't, this is not really going to work for.
Totally. Biochemistry, organic chemistry. Those are the ones that weed out those people who had those ideas of, I'm going to be a doctor. If this is what it means, no.
Like, never mind. And I love the couple comments here. Janine, oh, so good to have you here. She says, if we could all be more honest, we'd all feel better, right? When we only see and hear highlight reels, it feels isolating. Because we're like, am I the only one that's like struggling with this and everyone else's life is just so beautiful and perfect?
And yet we do that so often, especially in our relationships, where we don't speak up for those things that are bothering us. And so then it just builds, and we start to get resentful, and the disconnect grows. And so if we could even just bring in more of that raw honesty in our relationships, figuring out how to communicate it in a way that will move to repair, but repairing it and not letting it build because we're afraid to speak the truth of how we really feel or what really bothers us. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we can talk about that more. It would be really interesting, and then see the connection between how maybe trauma causes people to mute themselves in certain ways. Some of what you're saying reminds me, I've had Rick Hansen and Harville Hendricks and his wife Helen LaKelly Hunt on the show, and they both speak, particularly Harville, about repairing in relationships. And so I'm curious, how have you seen that when someone is in a situation where they're experiencing conflict, or they're afraid to really show up and say what needs to be said? What have you found to be really helpful for people, for yourself, in situations like that, to come to a place of repair and healing, and maybe even restoration of some type of a relationship?
Rachel, I'm going to answer that question by saying, like, how we got there in the first place was that trauma creates very predictable patterns in our life, relationships, and health. And they're predictable patterns because as trauma becomes a chronic state, and not just an event that happened in our past, but just becomes a chronic survival state that our body is in, then that becomes our operating system. And so everything that comes from us will be through that lens of stored trauma. And one of those predictable patterns is a pattern of what we call dissociation. There's 5 Ds that are the patterns. And dissociation is the pattern of escape. And escape is when it's too painful for us to be present to our experience. And we find many ways in which to escape. We can escape through distraction. We can escape through food. We can escape through just not fully engaging, being physically present, but not mentally present or emotionally present. Those are all ways in which we can escape the full intensity and being present for our experience. And that is what happens then in relationships, is that something is too uncomfortable for us, and we're looking for that escape rather than being able to be fully present to it. The solution is learning how to be present for even those uncomfortable things. The trauma healing journey is not about only having good feelings in my life. The trauma healing journey is about becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable feelings so that I can stay present with them and move through them. When I feel that I need to escape from them, then I don't move through them, and they just get stuck. And it actually leads to more trauma and overwhelm getting accumulated in our body. That will make that pattern of escape and dissociation even stronger with time. And so the solution really is to look at, well, why can't I be present for this? Why can't I be present to the truth? Why can't I be present to conflict? Why can't I be present? What is it about this that creates something so painful in my body that I don't want to be present for it? And I mean, in essence, that is the trauma healing journey, is building our capacity to be present. And that is the only antidote to the patterns that show up in our relationships, because so much of it comes down to that pattern of escape. There's also the pattern of immobilization, where we freeze up in response to something that was said or something that happened, and rather than being able to talk about it, we freeze. And then there's also the pattern of energy conservation, and stored trauma creates a state of low energy, perceived low energy. It's not that we actually have low energy. We're eating enough calories, so we have the energy, but it's this perception that our nervous system has that I've got low energy, and so I need to conserve every bit of energy that I have. And so anything that takes more energy from me, that's just not safe. We might die if we use our energy for that. And it seems silly to our logical brain, but that is literally how our autonomic nervous system thinks. And that's where stored trauma lies, is in our autonomic nervous system. And so it will have this philosophy that That conversation, that hard conversation would take energy. Yeah, we better not do that. It's better for us to avoid it. It's better for us to escape. It's better for us to not have to use the energy to be present for a hard conversation like that. And yet, when we continue that trajectory over our lifetime, imagine all of the emotions that we just continue to store and to shove down and to numb. And our body literally is walking around with a huge trauma burden because of everything that we have not moved through and been able to feel and been able to process and been able to speak the truth about and seek that repair and resolution.
Mm. I relate to so much of what you were just sharing. And even that question of why can't I be present? I mean, sometimes I think, well, first of all, I'm curious that Janine said, I love that trauma healing doesn't mean just being able to feel happy again. It means being able to healthfully feel all your feelings. And, if you say the truth, there's always a chance that someone else, Joby says, is willing to live that truth, will identify themselves as an ally. And so sometimes we can have that experience. We can't really find out who's with us until we're honest and put the truth out there. Like, so that's a form of connection, right? Is when we start speaking the truth.
How can we be truly connected with ourselves or with another person if it's not with truth?
Yeah. Well, I wonder, I think back to situations, a lot of the time, I'm curious about, let me ask you the second question, but I'm going to ask you first. There's a lot of definitions about trauma, and I'm curious how you define it.
Rachel, I am a medical physician. And so I define trauma literally by how the body experiences trauma. And there is a very specific physiological response that only happens when we go into a trauma state. And we actually do have a trauma state in our physiology. And so anything that puts us in that state is a trauma. So my definition of trauma is anything that for any reason at that time in our life overwhelmed us, overwhelmed our capacity to stay present with it, overwhelmed our capacity to process it, overwhelmed our capacity to understand it. Bessel van der Kolk talks about trauma being anything that is overwhelming, unbelievable, and unbearable. And so here's this element again of it overwhelms our body. It literally overwhelms our physiology. And I'll speak to that in a moment. Unbelievable because there has to be this element of, I can't believe this is happening. And then unbearable refers to this inability to be present to it. It feels unbearable, and so I must escape. Now, overwhelming our biology to process it, to respond to it. There is a very specific steps in order to get the body into a trauma state. The first step is always, it starts with a startle, right? Like you hear a noise or you see something and there's that initial startle. Now the startle is intended to decide if that is a real threat or if that was just your kid jumping out to scare you and have fun with you. And so the startle is just that moment to figure out, and your body has 15 seconds to figure it out. 15 seconds to figure out, okay, is this real? Or am I going to come back into calm aliveness? And so in those 15 seconds, your body is literally tuning in to that, what you heard, what you saw, what you smelled, whatever it is, whatever the sensory information was that triggered you. And all of our senses are pointed on that one thing. Like you can't focus on anything else when you're in that startle response because you've got 15 seconds to figure this out. If your body decides, and your body, I do mean your nervous system, if your nervous system decides, yeah, this is a real threat, then it elevates it into the next step, which is the stress response. It puts your physiology in a state that's called the sympathetic state. Now, this state is your highest energy state. If you had a car, it would be your sports mode in that car, because you are going to rev all of your engines. You're going to stoke all of your fires in order to generate the energy to respond to what you've just decided is a real threat. This is where you might move into fighting, or you might move that energy into running away. But it is a very active self-defense that is based with movement. It is, your whole body, even down to your cells and your mitochondria, are generating a lot more energy in order to move you. The adrenaline that's released is to move you. It is an action state. What happens next is what is required for the body to go into a trauma response. And as we are attempting to move in self-defense, or have the intentions to move to self-defense, boom, something stops us. And what was just a threat is now an inescapable life threat, because something is blocking my ability to move into the action of self-defense. This can be something outside of us. Like if you think of, again, a car, if my car is up against a brick wall, that brick wall is stopping my car. It does not matter how much I push down on the gas pedal, something is blocking the movement. But it can also be something inside of us. And this is where we get to talk about the biology of trauma, because most often our own biology holds us back because our nervous system senses, we don't have enough energy. And so we should move into an energy conservation state rather than continuing to use our.
Oh, wait, we just lost your audio. Like right in the middle of a TED Talk. Hold that thought. I know everyone's on the edge of their seat. Is everyone else on the edge of their seat like I am? I think we got her back. There you go. You're back. Continue that thought. We can't hear you. I'm not sure what happened to your audio. It cut out. Can you just switch to maybe computer audio, even if it's not as clear with your mic? Under settings. I'm not sure why it cut your mic. See, when a message is meant to be heard, this is when tech stuff happens. StreamYard has a mind of its own. Anthony, good to see you. Leslie, hi. Edge of our seats. Oh no. Hold on, everyone. We will get this together. Hopefully this works. Well, I'm curious if anyone has any questions, drop them in the chat. Hopefully we have time for questions. If you have a specific question you want to make sure that I ask Dr. Aimee, drop it into the comments and it'll show up for us and we will see. I can sing for you. You keep getting logged off the session too. That's strange. I wonder why. I'm staying in here, which is good, but apparently StreamYard has other things. I can sing for you. How about all of you know that this did not warm up for singing. My voice is shot. I sang at church yesterday, but I want all of you to remember that you are somebody, you are somebody, you matter and you are enough. Drop in the chat somebody who's somebody for you. You are somebody, you are somebody, you matter and you are enough. You are enough, enough, enough. Y'all are enough. Got a little bit of froggy voice today, but I'll sing for you because, conversion disorder. I'm not sure I know what that is, but Leslie, I will make sure that I build this in and ask her. We'll just keep fingers crossed. Let me see if I got an email, everybody. Sometimes things happen and we can't control them, but can trauma ever be good for a person to wake them up? Ooh, whew. That's one. That's a zinger, Toby. My favorite. This is the best. You can hear the rasp in my voice a little, maybe. I just overdid it a little this weekend. I've been doing like an hour and a half of vocal warm-ups and singing for 3 hours yesterday. My sweet Avo keeps asking me to play your music over and over again. Oh my gosh. Oh, it's Covered in the Body Keeps the Score. Oh, I wonder, I have that book right here. So I wonder, while we're waiting, these are some of my favorite books on this topic. I'm a nerd on this topic. I'm not a board certified physician, but The Myth of Normal, Gabor Mate. It's as thick as a Bible. I clearly like it. My tabbing is excessive. And she's back. Hi.
Hi.
We missed you. Everyone's on the edge of their seats. They're so excited.
I know we got stuck in the stress response and adrenaline.
It's just what happens sometimes. We're like talking about it. We're like, the universe is like, no, we need to have an experience right now what this feels like.
We need to experience a stress, and can we resolve it? Can we repair it and not go into the trauma response?
Can we not? There were some things that I'm just looking at some comments. There's a couple questions I want to make sure that we get to at some point, but I also want to, you were taking us through the process of what turns something into a trauma experience and how we respond, needing to take action when we feel like we can't.
Yes.
So
what happens is that in that moment when something blocks our ability, makes our efforts or intentions useless, that's when the body gets overwhelmed. And the body will decide, I should shut down. And shutting down is the trauma state. It starts with a moment of freeze where it's like freeze with fear. This, that's the unbelievable part where I don't have enough of what it takes. I'm not strong enough. I'm not smart enough. I don't have what it takes. And this is an inescapable life threat. And at that point, then our body goes into an internal collapse, literally shutting everything down to our mitochondria so that we can conserve energy. And that becomes our best survival strategy. Unfortunately, in the process, we still have all of this adrenaline running around and we haven't been able to move. And so we haven't been able to discharge the adrenaline. And so it creates this big imbalance and chaos inside of our health, inside of our physiology. Eventually, as that becomes a chronic state, that's how we start to develop the health symptoms, conditions, and even diagnoses of this trauma response happening for many people every day, right? Like every day they're going into a place where they feel overwhelmed with life.
Yeah.
And that takes a big toll on our biology. And we also have that biology that can turn around and keep us stuck because it keeps us stuck with feeling like we don't have any energy. Or we may not have any energy. We may have developed so much inflammation, for example, that our nervous system assesses our metabolic health. It does that by getting signals from our cells and our mitochondria. And that's how it decides, yeah, we don't have enough energy to meet this stress. And we should just shut down, escape, and not be present.
Yeah. That's, can you hear me? We may just
I can. And
okay.
this is interesting.
Are you hardwired? If it's running off Wi-Fi, sometimes it's too much for Wi-Fi. Shutting down all the other windows on your computer is helpful. I'm hardwired. So usually
I cleared out all my other tabs.
Okay.
So
StreamYard is very demanding. You know, as you talk about this, I think one of the things that's interesting is sometimes there can be things that have happened in our past. Like we say, like, why can't I be present? Or why am I shutting down? I'm curious what your perspective is. I'm going to share a story and then 2 questions. I would imagine, and I know this is true for me, that there's things that happen in our past that we may not have awareness of the connection. Like this thing that happened, we may not be aware of how that thing that happened, that's the root of why we can't be present, or that's the root of why our tendency is to disassociate. And then sometimes there can be things that are very tangible that have happened. Like I know, I'll share this with you. So a lot of people in the community know this, but I was, May of 2020, was out running with my husband and I was hit by a pickup truck. And I had a spinal fracture in my T12 vertebrae and cartilage damage to my ankle. And every bit of that experience is by the most traumatic thing by far that has ever happened, because I had that moment of just completely, I followed all the rules. The light was red, the signal was white, the truck was stopped. Like I literally did everything. It's like you follow the rules and then you're still violated. That's like particularly disturbing. And I remember I started seeing a somatic therapist. I've mentioned this on the show before. So for everyone, if you're looking for a therapist, I mean, trauma-informed therapist baseline, but, and I would love for you specific words, but somatic, right? Therapist has been a gift for me. And I went to my first session with her. This was about 6 months after the accident. I was having some PTSD symptoms that I didn't know were PTSD, like hyperarousal and being super alert. And if like something bobbled, I would jump out of my skin. I mean, just all these very telltale things. And I'm on the therapy table because she's a rolfer. So she does myofascial release and psychotherapy. So I'm laying on my back on a massage table and she's pushing along the outside of my right leg, just up and down my leg and asking, what am I noticing and where am I noticing it? And I said, I feel like my body is resisting you. And she said, oh, like you want to push me away? And I said, I don't know why, right? Because we don't always know why. I don't know why I feel that way. I just feel this like tension building in my body and my body is like, eh. So she said, I want you to sit up and I want you to push me. So I sat up and I pushed her and she's like, push me hard. She's in her early 60s and she's like, push me harder, like push me enough, like make me move. And I was like, I just met you like 20 minutes ago. This is like, all right, let's go. So I pushed her like 4 times, probably 4 or 5 times. And then I laid back down on the table and my whole body, I started sobbing. She said, what are you noticing? And I said, I wanted to push the truck away and I couldn't. And it was like, that was trapped in my body for 6 months. So I'm curious, I know there's a biology, I'm sure, behind something like that, like a release, like what? And then there's things that happen in our past that we don't necessarily realize are connected to why we show up the way we do later in life.
And what you're speaking to, Rachel, really still comes down to your theme of unmute, right? Like unmute our body. Our body has memories. Our body has messages for us, and we have not been listening. Yeah. We haven't known to listen, but also when we get the messages like push people away, we're like, but that's weird. I just met her. That would seem rude. I don't want to be a rude person. And so like our own brain, we can get in our own way for unmuting our body because our body knows what it needs to get back to a place of healing. Our body has that innate ability to heal, and we just need to be able to unmute it and unblock it. Yeah. And the pattern that you're describing is that pattern of dysregulation. And so when we don't complete a trauma response, so when the body goes into a trauma response, there is a way that we can complete it at that time. But when we don't, and we don't because we've never been taught how to, and so nobody does until they learn this stuff. But when we don't complete it, then our body gets stuck in what I call a body trauma loop. And it's looping through that whole sequence of the trauma response. And we can get stuck in the hyperarousal. We can get stuck in the startle response, and small things send us off. That is this pattern of dysregulation of our body being stuck in that body trauma loop. And our way out is to learn how to work with that trauma response and resolve it, complete it. And thankfully for you, you had the wisdom and the foresight to go into a somatic therapist 6 months after your accident. Some people never do. Some people never do. And that pattern of dysregulation of the nervous system that you started noticing, that same dysregulation just starts to pick up momentum. And it creates more health problems for us. And we never know that it's actually related to our nervous system is stuck in a body trauma loop and is driving our symptoms. We go to a GI doctor for our digestive issues. We go to this doctor for that issue. We go to this doctor for that issue, not realizing that what's driving it all is our body stuck in this trauma pattern of dysregulation, where it's basically reactions that are extreme, reactions that are not really appropriate for the situation, but yet to our nervous system, to our body, they are very appropriate. And so that even further creates more tension and internal conflict as our brain says, well, this is stupid. And our body says, well, you clearly don't understand. I'm trying to keep us alive.
Yeah.
And over time, that disconnect, that dysregulation, that dissociation, of course, it's going to cause us more and more problems in all levels of our life.
Mm-hmm.
And so, really, to be able to understand and see that, like these patterns represent a root cause. They're not random and they're not disconnected. They all have a root cause. And as I can start to learn now those skills to work with my trauma response, start completing my responses, both my startle, my stress, and my trauma responses, but completing those cycles, then I can stop the further burdening of my body. And then we can start to unburden all the decades of responses that we've never completed and have stored.
And I'm curious for ways, there's two questions I want to make sure I get to for sure. But, sometimes if a cycle starts when we're really young, right? People have all sorts of challenges, whether it's illnesses or abuse or most people have to that we meet, have been through stuff that we could never know or never imagine. I think most people have been through something. And when I think back to this happening, I think back to being a little girl. And when I was 6 months old, my poor parents, they were like, we're horrible parents. We should not be allowed to have children. I was on a little walker, those little walker things that little babies are in, and they go back and forth. I was on my front porch and there was a gate. And the gate apparently was not as sturdy as a gate should be. And at 6 months, I went through the gate and I tumbled down the steps and I landed upright. They were hard. They were like, we killed her. I mean, they literally were like, she's dead. I think my mom was either about to be pregnant with my brother or was just pregnant with him at this. I mean, just like, what? And apparently I cried immediately and they took me to the hospital. I vomited or something, but I've always been curious about stuff like that. And then I had chronic ear, nose, and throat infections and half a dozen surgeries as a child, constant every 2 years, surgery. Kids aren't prepared to go under anesthesia and bright lights and have these things happen and have no explanation or no coping mechanisms. That's not normal. So then when that's your life and you have something like this happen at 35, however old I was when this accident happened, it's all cumulative. So how does all this stuff accumulate? And if people are in a position, I know people listening might have had something happen 20 years ago, might have had something happen when they were 5 years old. And they're like, how do I know how to complete the stress? How do I know how to complete the trauma cycle? If someone's listening and wondering, thinking about their own trauma, how can people even begin to think about how to complete a trauma cycle that they might have experienced?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I have found this to be so essential to know where to start, because if we don't know where to start, we do it in an unsafe way. And part of my medical training was 3.5 years as a general surgeon. And there is no way that we would have taken somebody to surgery if we hadn't have done all the steps to prepare for them to have a safe surgery experience, right? We need them to come out the other end and be better than how we're taking them in. But there requires a preparation for that. And so that is part of what I would really want to communicate today is there is this foundation that we lay that will stabilize our system, our nervous system, our body, so that then we can do some of this work and not be completely unraveled in the process. And I want to take us back to really understanding how early this trauma response can start that most people are not aware of. And so they miss it. They don't understand why they see these trauma patterns in their life. But when we are born, Rachel, we have no capacity whatsoever to regulate our own emotions. We have no capacity to regulate our own physiology, which seems kind of weird. So why would human babies be born if they're not able to be self-sufficient? You see horses, right? Colts are born and they can seem self-sufficient. They can pretty much very quickly get up and walk around. They seem to be okay. So what is it with human babies? And the reality is that our nervous system needs more time to develop those capacities. And if we spent more time in the womb, we would get too big to come out the canal. So we have to be born. And that's really not the end of our dependence on someone else. It's just a step in that process of developing our nervous system. Our nervous system is so fragile that it cannot stop the upregulation of energy, for example. When it does get startled, it can't resolve that by its own. It has to have someone else's nervous system. We call that co-regulation, in order to be able to bring that train back under control. Otherwise, it does become a runaway train. And for a baby, the only solution, if they don't get the level of co-regulation that they need, is to shut down their own system in order to stop that runaway train that would result in even like a heart attack, because they literally are not able to stop that activation once it happens. And when we don't get enough co-regulation as an early infant, then that is when we start shutting our own body down in order to stop that runaway train. And so our programming to go into that trauma shutdown can be so early in life that we don't even remember anything that happened, because this was just our daily life. We can have the best of parents, and yet we still did not get the level of co-regulation that our nervous system needed. And that also plays into, sometimes we can be born with biology that makes us more sensitive, and more sensitive means I need more co-regulation from someone. But what if our parents are like everyone else in the world, and they've learned by default to not fully be present? That they themselves are distracted, that they themselves are not connected with their own body. A mother's ability to understand what her baby needs is actually directly related to her own ability to sense her own body and what her own body is feeling and sensing. And so we see that this has just been accumulation over generations. But that's how early then our trauma response would have started, and there would never have been a clear trauma event necessarily to look back and say, well, I had trauma as a child. But now that we're adults, the responsibility does lie with us to make those changes. Even though it may not have been our fault originally, it is our responsibility now. And we can do that. And one of my favorite lessons learned along the way for me was that I am the one that I've been waiting for. I am the one that I've been waiting for. And many people going through my courses, as we do this work, they've realized, oh, I've still been waiting for my mommy. There's a part of me that's still waiting for my daddy to come and to save me. And now we get to shift that and say, I'm here for myself now. And I can learn how to be that present for myself. And I can learn the skills to start working with this trauma response in such a way that I do it safely. Because here's the problem, Rachel, is that when we don't do it safely, our body comes to not trust us. And our body comes to be afraid of us. Like, oh no, here she comes again. Oh, she's going to do another therapy session. Oh no, right? Like, hold on, this is going to be intense. And instead, what if we built trust with our body and said, I'm going to go at the pace that you feel safe. And I'm going to learn what makes you feel safe so that we can do more work, but not lose our sense of safety in the meantime. I call that laying our foundation of regulation. And we need to have a degree of regulation before we're really ready to dive into some of the deeper traumas or patterns that we have. We're not ready for that yet. We haven't done the preparation for the surgery. We haven't actually called in the anesthesiologist yet. Like they haven't, right? Like we haven't done the preparation for that deep surgery. And when we don't do that preparation, there is a high risk. It's the same with trauma work. There is a risk of opening up things too much too fast if we haven't laid that foundation of regulation. And that means I learn skills. I go in skilled. I don't go in wondering like, well, let's see what's going to happen here, or I hope this turns out okay. Right? Like that's how we get hurt. And that's how we actually create the distrust that our body has in us. And it's going to resist us. Just like you resisted the therapist. But yet when it's us that our body is resisting, how does our body push us away? It can't. And so we get into this place where we haven't had the tools, we haven't had the knowledge to be able to work with our body to do it safely. And so as I was starting to work with people on their biology and unblocking their biology, I realized, oh no, like they've got to do this foundational piece first. And it won't surprise you that my foundation is with somatic work. There's 21 days of different somatic exercises that I lead people through. They're different. So they're walking away with 21 different somatic exercises that will create within 2 minutes a felt sense of safety, a felt sense of support, and then a felt sense of safe opening and expansion. Not just expansion, but safe. And by safe, I mean listening to my body as I do that so that my body and I can be on the same team. I'm not pushing my body anymore faster than what it feels safe to go. And then the second 21 days is 21 days of parts work. And I build my parts work or internal family systems on top of the somatic work so that we've just learned these skills with somatic work, connecting with our body, responding to our body, being present with our body, even learning how to be present to those things that are uncomfortable. And then let's bring in parts work. And we have this part of us. Maybe we have a young, scared part of us. How does that part show up in our body? How do we know when that part is speaking to us? Well, maybe I have a knife or twisting sensation in my gut, or maybe my right shoulder starts to ache, or maybe I get a neck pain. There are very specific ways in which different parts of us show up, and they have messages for us. And so we get to learn how to hear those messages so that we can then go into the deeper work, being able to know what our body is trying to say to us and work with our body. And now we're really ready. Now we've got tools. Now we've got skills, and we know how to do it safely.
And those tools are all available at biologyoftrauma.com, right? If someone wants to explore that. And what is that course called? The 21 days and is that?
Yes, I've got the course and it's called the Foundational Journey. So we start with 21-day journey of somatic work, then 21 days of somatic parts work. And so altogether it's a 6-week foundational journey.
Perfect. I know we have some people that are definitely going to be into that. There were some questions that came through. One of them was around, this is from Leslie. So can you ask her what she knows about conversion disorders? She read about this in The Body Keeps the Score and if she's ever treated anyone with this. Curious.
So when we look at the patterns of trauma, we see that one of those patterns is the dissociation and the escape. And part of that can be that we need to escape from our trauma and the emotions and the memories so much that we convert that into physical sensations. We actually convert that into a physical condition or diagnosis. This is very similar to like the psychosomatic symptoms or the psychosomatic conditions where literally our body says, I can't be present to that trauma, so let me create a disease because that feels safer to deal with. And so there are many ways in which that pattern of dissociation or escape presents itself. Conversion disorder is just one of those symptoms. But from my perspective, it's all a trauma symptom. It's not the problem. It's just a symptom of the stored trauma. And so the process is not any different. We know that we have stored trauma, so we lay our foundation and start learning how to work with our trauma response.
Yeah. Thank you for responding to that. And I totally get that. I feel like that's even my own journey as my body's just been like, we're up to a point and we're going to get sick. And we're up to, like, I got Epstein-Barr 7 years ago. And it was like, my body was like, hi, you had a dream that you were drowning and you had trouble with your memory in your early 30s. Can we please pay attention to this? And then I was like, no. And then my body was eventually like, all right, well, you're just going to have mono and lose your voice and feel like garbage for 9 months. So I love you, but like, you need to be reeled in.
Right. And this is what happens when we disconnect from our body and we're not on the same team as our body. Our body really has no other choice. It is trying to protect us.
Yeah.
And so it will slow us down when it realizes, like, I think we're going too fast. We're accumulating too much trauma. We've got to slow down. And of course, our logical brain is slow down. No, that's not an option. We got a career. We've got family. We've got responsibilities. We don't have time for that. And so our body's like, okay, I'm going to need to step in and save you. Like, our body really does think that it's doing what's best for us. And when we look at the patterns of trauma and how they affect our biology, we literally do create the environment that welcomes toxins, that welcomes infections. It's like we've set the table for them and we've opened the door and invited them in. And so it's not a surprise to me at all when I hear stories like yours.
Yeah. And part of it is like, well, I've heard the phrase, you've been assigned this mountain to show others it can be moved. And I feel like so much of my life has been like, well, that thing, all right, well, that sucked. But like, how can I now that I'm working through it or have worked through it, how can I use that for good for somebody else to feel validated and less alone in their own experience of that? And how can I use this as an opportunity to deepen my own healing as opposed to like, this is the worst. It never should have happened. It's like, okay, stay mad at it, or you can like use it for something. There was another question that came up of, Toby said, can trauma ever be good for a person to wake them up, so to speak? Curious.
That's an interesting question. And I'm gonna even use the word hard question. And here's what I've learned along the way in not only my own journey, but now working with the thousands of people who've come through my courses. Initially, that is the worst thing that you could ever tell somebody. Please don't ever say that, right? When someone is in the middle of their grief, right? Like, that is not the right time to tell them, this will be a gift for you. No, this is not the right timing. That's not where they're at. And part of co-regulating with people is being able to match where they're at right now, not try to move them forward to a step where they're not there yet. And as we actually gain skills and knowledge, it shifts things. When we feel like there's no hope because we've been stuck, don't talk to me about trauma being a gift.
Yeah.
But as I start to learn the skills, what happens, Rachel, is that people become better versions of themselves than they ever knew was possible. And it's that tells them eventually, wow, that trauma ended up being a gift for me because it led me down this path that has made me a better person than I may have even been before the trauma, because I didn't have to do this. I didn't even know that I wasn't being fully present in my life with myself, with others. I didn't have to know that because I was going along pretty well. And so it can be a gift when people do that journey and do that work, that they come out. I mean, you never actually finish the journey, right? Like, it just becomes this endless possibilities of, well, how present do you want to be in your life? Well, how much expansion do you want to have? And that's what becomes the gift, is that it opens up for them the pathway with practical tools and knowledge to have a life that they actually never imagined possible.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was music. Like, I loved singing from the time I was very little, but I was very shy about it. I would never perform. And then during COVID with my accident, I was in a back brace. I like couldn't do a lot. And I was like, I need an outlet. And so I started recording covers and putting them on LinkedIn. And then I started working with a producer 2 years ago. And my second song was called Didn't See It Coming. And it was about the didn't see it coming moments in our lives that blindside us and the choice we have to rise up in the midst of them. And so it's like you develop, if you're willing to be present with these experiences, you develop a depth of compassion that like, I just don't know how you develop any other way, like other than knowing what it feels like to be in despair, to be grieving, to be in pain, to experience a total disruption of your life. Like you develop such a depth of compassion and empathy.
Yeah.
That
And I like how you
sometimes,
express that, Rachel, right? Like it gives you depth.
yeah.
At least that's what the possibility is, and it's everyone's choice whether they want to do that. And for someone who doesn't want to do the work of trauma, no blame whatsoever, right? Like each
Yeah.
one can choose what they want. For those who have chosen it, that's exactly what I see as you're describing. It gives them a depth that they never had before.
Yeah. And then people see that and they're drawn to it because they're like, oh, that's real.
Exactly.
Oh, wow. Now I can bring my broken parts to this person and it's not too much. Like our capacity to handle other people's stuff also expands, I find,
Yes.
when you've had to be with your own stuff and to a degree you never knew you would have to. You're like, oh, I can handle it. Come here, cry in my arms. I don't care. Like I'm good. Like we'll work this out. Like it's just, I think that can also, that capacity gets developed. So,
Sure.
and I'll close with this comment and then we'll invite you to share where people can find you. So this is the case for me. I had PTSD after a premature traumatic birth. Changed me for the better in so many ways. She just adores her daughter, Ava, she's mentioned. I don't know what if I would have ever gotten to this point without that. Never would have chosen it, but my goodness, how it changed my life.
That is beautiful.
Like, so where can people learn more about you? I know we mentioned the website, but tell us, like, where can people continue to learn and hear from you and gain insight and wisdom?
Yeah, I would say if something from today piqued their curiosity, I have some specific guides that would give them that science again. And so I have the essential sequence guide. They can find that on my website. I also have my Biology of Trauma podcast where I teach a lot of this stuff over and over again. I also use stories to teach. So they'll hear stories from those coming through my courses, from my practitioners that I'm training. And those will be the guides and the resources that they can really dig in deeper to understand the science. And then okay, if I want more of this, what could I do?
Wonderful. Well, I am like immediately subscribing to your podcast. I'm just telling you that right now because I knew this conversation was going to be helpful. I feel like I could just like talk to you for 5 hours because you are so wise and have so much insight to offer. And so I just am so grateful for you to spend time with us today. So thank you so much, Dr. Aimee. I really appreciate it.
Rachel, I want to say thank you for the work that you're doing in the world, right? Like this is such an important message, and I really value and appreciate your willingness to be the one to stand up and say we need to unmute.
Oh, well, thank you. Like love fest today. My day is good. I don't need anything else good to happen today. That was great. Thank you so much again. We will make sure we drop all the links in the chat so people can follow you as well and all the places and continue to learn from you. So thank you again. I hope this is not the last time we connect, but just the introduction. And again, continue to do this work that you're doing in the world. It's so needed and so healing. And it's great to have you. Everybody will be back in 2 weeks. The Tuesday's President's Day week, so we're going to have the show on a Tuesday. We will have Zach Demopoulos on and his co-author talking about caregiving, which is another topic that does not get nearly enough attention. So with that, we will see you all in 2 weeks. Have a wonderful week, everybody. Bye.